Abdu Murray is the North American Director of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Michigan and earned his Juris Doctor from the University of Michigan Law School. For most of his life, Abdu was a proud Muslim who studied the Quran and Islam. After a 9-year investigation into the historical, philosophical, and scientific underpinnings of the major world religions and views, Abdu discovered that the historic Christian faith alone can answer the questions of the mind and the longings of the heart. It's time to bring clarity with compassion. Please welcome Abdu Murray.
Well, good morning, everyone. Oh, that's a good morning. You guys did it right. You guys obviously grabbed your cups of ambition, as Dolly Parton would say this morning. And I'm so glad to see you here. So thankful to be in California. I come from Detroit, where yesterday when I left, it was 8. And but funnily enough, today it's about, I think it's the high 40s, so it's almost as warm as it is here, which is, I think, unfair that I left Michigan and it got warmer. But here we are. It's a pleasure to be with you all. The time runs a little on the short side, so I want to make sure that I can talk about a pretty heady topic, but you're here at AMP where heady topics are our speciality, and speak about a cultural issue. How does apologetics work in the current cultural milieu where we're engaged in a post-truth culture and where facts and feelings seem to collide oftentimes and one takes precedent over the other very often? As I speak about this issue, about where we are culturally and where we can actually impact people in a positive way for the gospel, I'm reminded of something that happened to me a couple of years ago as I was traveling on a speaking engagement. Now, I travel an awful lot. I think last year was 180 days travel. This year is going to be something similar to that as well, all over the world. And when I travel internationally, I typically fly. But because I'm in Michigan, when I go to Canada, in Ontario, I often will drive to Ontario, or depending on where I'm going in Ontario. Well, I usually take the Ambassador Tunnel, which is the tunnel that connects Windsor and Detroit, or the Ambassador Bridge, or the Detroit Tunnel, or the Blue Water Bridge in the north. But for this particular speaking engagement, I was going to a town called Wallaceburg, Ontario, a big open-air tent meeting. I think like 1,000 people or something like that were at this thing. But Wallaceburg is in this weird spot in Ontario where the bridge or the tunnel is actually a bad distance from it. So I had to take a ferry across the river. Now, I'm from the Great Lakes state. When I say car ferry, I think of a ship that can hold 30 or 40 cars. That's what you do on the Great Lakes, is you take these 30 or 40 car ships across the lakes. Well, I was crossing the river. So when I got to the car ferry port, this was not one of these ship things. This was like this little, to call it a boat is an exaggeration. It's this little white rickety thing where the paint is peeling off of it. It holds 2 cars maximum. And I got onto this thing, and I totally expected the guy to pull me across the river like Lord of the Rings style, you know, with the rope. So I get onto this boat, and the guy says, just stay in your car. It'll be a short trip. Don't worry about it. And I must oblige them because it was a super hot morning, and I wanted to stay in the car for the air conditioning purposes. But I'm also extremely poor with directions. I mean, I get lost in my own backyard. I'm like, where's the house? And there it is, that big building. So I'm looking at my GPS incessantly. I'm always looking at it. So I'm sitting on this boat in my car, and I'm looking at the GPS to make sure that when I cross over into Canada, I won't get lost. My GPS will have the right location. It was at the moment I looked down at my GPS, that's when we left the dock. So I didn't see us leave. But because I was in the car, the suspension of the car and its sheer mass absorbed the energy of us leaving, so I didn't feel us leave the dock either. So I had that moment of vertigo and panic you have when you look up and you're not sure if you're moving or not. You know, you're sitting at the intersection, there's a bus next to you, it goes forward, and you're not quite sure if it's going forward or you're moving backward. And that slight vertigo and panic sets in. And what do you do at that moment? Well, first of all, you hit the brakes as hard as you possibly can. But the next thing you do is you look for a fixed point of reference. You look at the building, you look at the street light, you look at something to find out if you're moving relative to the other object. And when you find out, the confusion goes away, the nausea clears up. Well, I was on a river. There are no fixed points of reference. Everything is moving. If the boat is moving and I'm on the boat, that's not going to help me. And the river, by definition, is always flowing. So I had to look to the distant shore. And I saw, as the distant shore grew larger and larger in my field of vision, that's when I realized, yes, I'm moving. My equilibrium started to match what my eyes were seeing, and all the confusion went away. Culturally speaking, we are in the river, where we no longer see fixed points of reference anymore, where we left dry land. We acknowledge dry land exists. We acknowledge that fixed points of reference do exist, but we left dry land quite some time ago, and now we've got our sea legs. And so when we get stability, that's when we feel queasy. And we sort of resent dry land because we want everything to be flowing in different directions, because we want a sense of confusion. We want a sense of uncertainty because it allows us for something. It allows for an autonomy. It allows us to stretch boundaries. There are no more boundaries, and we can do what we want. But it's resulted in quite a bit of anxiety and confusion. If you look at the literature now, you're seeing that young children, between the ages of like 8 and 15, are experiencing, nationally speaking, and I think across the West, higher levels of anxiety than they've ever felt before. Yes, there's pressures to succeed and all these things, but oftentimes they just are being told, you can figure out who and what you are at 8. And by the way, if you have any inclination whatsoever towards that, we're going to governmentally enforce that we actually tell your parents to make sure they give you those preferences, even if it's chemically enhanced, and you can figure out who you are. At 8, can you imagine the pressure of an 8-year-old being told, you can figure out who you are? There are people in this room who don't know who they are. You've just figured it out. Maybe there's a maturity that's come at age 35 and older where you're like, I think I get who I am now. You're telling an 8-year-old to do this? And there's an anxiety level that begins to swell because all these questions are now being forced upon them, and you have to make a decision now, and we're going to embrace your confusion and do whatever it is that can get you to be who you want to be, because your preferences matter more than the realities. In various areas. Think of the questions we're asking now. The questions about what does it mean to be human, with the transhumanism movement coming out now, where it's not just a matter of helping people who have infirmities with either gene editing or with prosthetic limbs, but we're actually enhancing human beings who have no problems. Saying we can go and become superhuman in some sense. Or what does it mean to be male? What does it mean to be female? What does it mean to be married? What does it mean for life to begin? What does it mean for life to end? These were things that were once solid. We once thought we know the answers to these questions and we can move on to other questions, and now we're saying, no, we have to question that again. And it's all moving in the river. It's creating a sense of chaos. It reminds me of something. I can look out and I can see that some of you are children of the 80s, and some of you had children who were children of the 80s. You remember in the 80s, there was a song that was very, very popular called Land of Confusion. And it was written basically in response to the Cold War. And there was this thing that happened where children were waking up in the middle of the night. And the children were waking up in the middle of the night because they were screaming because they had these nightmares that the USSR and the USA made the Cold War nuclear hot all of a sudden. And they were calling it like Cold War neurosis or Cold War anxiety. And there's a song, Land of Confusion, by the band Genesis. Listen to the words, listen to the words. It says, "Oh, Superman, where are you now? Where everything's gone wrong somehow. These men of steel, these men of power are losing control by the hour." That song was written 30 years ago. That song could be written today. "Oh, Superman, where are you now? When everything's gone wrong somehow, these men of steel, these men of power are losing control by the hour." That's what's happening nowadays when everything is up for grabs and nothing is stable, nothing is clear anymore. Think about this. We're living in a world where confusion is a virtue and clarity is a sin. So I want you to think about the news stories you've heard over the past 5-6 years. If you're confused sexually, you're a hero. If you're confused morally, you're progressive. If you're confused religiously, all paths lead to God, you're progressive or you're tolerant. So confusion sexually, hero. Confusion morally, you're progressive. Confusion religiously, you're tolerant. If you're clear on sexual boundaries, you're a bigot. If you're clear on moral transcendence, that's regressive. And if you're clear that maybe there is one religion, and maybe that one religion actually does lead to God and it has evidence for it, well, that's considered intolerant. Confusion becomes the virtue, and clarity becomes the sin. So we value confusion, except for one thing. We are clear on one thing. If you don't agree with me, you're Hitler. We're clear on this. And notice what I said. I didn't say, if you disagree with me, you're Hitler. If you don't agree with me, you're Hitler. You can't even be neutral. You can't even have a measured opinion about something. You have to have an opinion now. You can't wait. You can't wait for the facts to come in. How dare you wait for the facts to come in? My feelings are at stake. And this is, by the way, a broad spectrum. We're all guilty of this. If you're on the right, only the left tells lies. And if you're on the left, only the right tells lies. And if you're a centrist, the right and the left are always telling lies. We assume the worst in each other. You see, we're living in the grisly sort of hangover of a preference-based binge. But we still want to keep it going for reasons I can't totally explain. And just to prove the point, Oxford English Dictionaries in 2016 named its word of the year. And the word of the year is a word that captures the fascinations of the culture for that particular year. And in 2016, especially after the election cycle, the word of the year was post-truth. Now, post-truth was probably coined in 1992, but it was used in 2016 2,000 times more than in previous years combined. Post-truth. Now, what does post-truth mean? Something is post-truth, or a person is post-truth, if they elevate feelings and preferences over facts and truth. They elevate feelings and preferences over facts and truth. Now, that's different than postmodernism. Okay, postmodernism denied that truth exists. If you talk to a postmodern person, they'd say there's no objective truths. All attempts at objective truths are these power moves where you're trying to exert your power over somebody else by having these truth claims. And so in order to get rid of all these power struggles in the world, just get rid of truth claims. And so there are no objective truths. Now you can reason with someone like that, and you've all heard the reasoning when someone says there's no such thing as objective truth. You simply say, is that objectively true? And they quickly see that the whole thing is self-defeating. If it's true that there are no truths, then your statement's self-defeating. If it's false that there are no truths, then your statement itself is false. Why'd you even say it? You can reason with a postmodern person, but post-truth is different. It looks similar, but it's different. Postmodernism is dying. It's dying its death. But out of the ashes of postmodernism rises the phoenix of post-truth. Now, postmodernism denies that truth exists. Post-truth says, truth does exist, but my preferences and my feelings matter more. So if you were to look at somebody and say, here's the facts and the truth, and if they clash with their preferences, they might say, that's all well and good, I don't care. They won't deny what you're saying. They'll just deny that it has any relevance to what they believe. How do you reason with that? You can't, because facts and truths don't matter anymore. But there is a way. There is a way. Now, how do we get here? I think that's the important thing we have to understand. In order to reason with a post-truth culture, you have to do two things. And this is the two rubrics under which I'm going to speak today. One, you have to show them the grisly consequences of a post-truth culture. Because this is an increasingly pragmatic society. Tell me what works and what doesn't work, and I'll do what works. Well, if you show them that post-truth preferences and giving free rein to your preferences doesn't work, maybe they'll abandon it. But you also have to show them that there's a substitute for post-truth, and it's the actual truth. That post-truth thinking leads to enslavement, but the truth itself leads to freedom. And I want to sustain both those points for you today. How have we got to be a post-truth culture, where we elevate feelings and preferences over facts and truth, is basically as old as humanity. It really is. It's an age-old human condition. Ken was talking about it yesterday. The human condition, what's going on here? Os Guinness once said, I believe it was Os Guinness who said, that you can always judge the health of a culture by how it actually expresses its chief virtues. So the chief virtue in the West, what is it? It's obvious. It's freedom. It's on our coins, it's in our dollar bills, it's in our songs, it's in our movies where guys get eviscerated and they cry freedom at the end of it, and we think, I want to be that guy. We love this word freedom. We've stopped talking about freedom a long time ago. We're now talking about autonomy. We keep using the word freedom, but what we really mean is autonomy. And they're not the same thing. Autonomy, it comes from two Greek words, autos meaning self and nomos meaning law. So when you're autonomous, you are a law unto yourself. That means there are no boundaries. No one can tell you, if you're a law unto yourself, no one can tell you what the law actually is. You determine what the law actually is. And if your preferences matter more than the truth, then your preferences cannot be trampled upon, no matter how much the truth happens to fly in the face of your preferences. Here's the problem with autonomy in a post-truth world. If I'm a law unto myself, and you're a law unto yourself, and preferences matter more than truth, When my preferences and your preferences clash, and we're both equally authoritative laws unto ourselves, who is going to determine who's right and who's wrong? It won't be truth, it's on the bottom shelf. It won't be truth that determines who's right and who's wrong, it'll be power. And isn't it interesting, it's paradoxical, that in giving us full autonomy, we will eventually end up enslaved to those who have more power. So your autonomy or my autonomy will definitely be subverted. You'd think that the more freedom you have, the more free you'll be. Exactly the opposite is true. When you're given free reign through autonomy, you will become enslaved, and so will I. But we've sacrificed clarity on the altar of our autonomy. And when truth and clarity are sacrificed on that altar, what rises up from the ashes will choke the very breath out of freedom's lungs. It really will. So what are the couple of things that I think are resulting from this? A couple of consequences. I'll give you 3 consequences. I'm going to go through one of them really quickly because time runs short. But the first consequence in a post-truth culture is that when we elevate feelings over preferences and sacrifice clarity on the altar of our autonomy, we lose all sense of wisdom. All sense of wisdom. I was giving my testimony at a large gathering of people. It was a men's breakfast, actually. And I was giving my testimony about my journey from Islam to Christ. Now, when I give my testimony, I typically talk about how true the gospel is. I didn't become a Christian because Islam was false. I became a Christian because the gospel was true. And I talk about why that was compelling for me. Now, there's a guy sitting in the front row taking notes, like furiously taking notes, smoke from the page kind of notes. And I knew this is going to be one of the guys who talked to me the longest afterwards, which is okay. I love doing that part of this job. And sure enough, I got done, put my notes together, and he came over and talked to me. He said, "Hey, I appreciated the way you didn't disagree with Islam when you were giving your testimony." Look, you didn't quite get the point, because if I didn't disagree with Islam, then I would have stayed a Muslim and saved me and a lot of people a lot of pain. But go ahead, I know why you said that, because I talked about Christianity's truth. He said, "I want to show you something." Now, if you're a public speaker and someone says, "I want to show you something," it's going to be a long conversation. And it was, but it was a good one. He had a diagram he drew, and in the middle of the diagram was a big, capital, bold-faced T in the middle of the page. He said, "This represents the objective truth. There is a total objective truth, but we don't know all of it yet." I said, "So far I agree with you. There is truth, and we don't know all of it. If I knew all of it, I would be God, and I'm not God. So far we're in agreement that I'm not God." Off to a good start. And he said, "But we're all trying to get there. So all of us," and he had these little lowercase t's that were surrounding the big T. He said, "All of us have incomplete but equally valid versions of the truth." Now that's a very Buddhist thing to say, by the way. I'm like, "Really?" And I heard the moan already. You know what's coming. I asked him, I said, "All of us have equally valid versions of the truth?" He says, "Yes, all of us do, and I can't judge anybody because my version's incomplete." I'm like, "Really? Okay." So Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, Idi Amin, Mao Zedong, I can keep going. All these people had versions of the truth equally valid to yours? This is what he said. I'm telling you, these are exact words. He said, "I can tell you that I don't prefer their versions of the truth, but I can't disagree with them." Hitler is very safe to disagree with. It's okay. People tend to be okay with you doing that. I said, "Are you telling me you can't disagree with anybody?" He said, "That's right, we can't disagree with anybody." I said, "Sure you can." He said, "No, I can't." I said, "You just did it." 16 years as a trial lawyer, that's what that was. Now, I wasn't trying to humiliate this guy. I really wasn't. He's a very thoughtful, very well-read man. But what I was trying to point out is that oftentimes when we try to elevate our preferences above the truth, extremely smart, well-intentioned, very well-meaning people lose their own God-given sense of wisdom. I remember walking out of the venue, and the guy was by his car, and he was going, "If I can't disagree with anybody, but I disagree with him." He was doing that kind of a thing. We moved the needle quite a bit. It was great. But we lose this sense of wisdom, and it has societal implications as well. The free speech movement started on college campuses, and it's the place where it's in the most jeopardy because our sense of wisdom is being taken over by our desire for autonomy, by our desire to be affirmed all the time. So the first casualty of post-truth is our sense of wisdom. The second casualty of post-truth is our sense of integrity. Now, I say this, honestly, with something that is important for the church to know. We follow the way, the truth, and the life. So my question is your way truthful and life-giving? Because I'll tell you this, after the Obergefell decision happened, where the United States Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage across the United States, my emails were starting to light up and my social media feeds were abuzz with this story that people were propagating, that a gay activist had sued in federal court 2 Christian publishers over their translation of the Bible and trying to get it banned as hate speech now that the Supreme Court had legalized same-sex marriage. I remember getting those emails and all the buzz that I saw on social media, and I thought, that can't be true. So I did some research. 3 minutes. Took me 3 minutes, a commercials break worth of research to find out it wasn't true. It wasn't true. Yes, a gay man had sued 2 Christian publishers in federal court, by the way, in Michigan, which is where I'm from, in front of a judge that I happen to know. And he sued them not to have the Bible banned. He sued them because he said that they mistranslated the Bible to be non-gay affirming, and he wanted them to retranslate it, and he wanted money damages because he was emotionally hurt by it. Now, not only did he not try to ban the Bible as hate speech, he didn't file it after Obergefell. He filed it 7 years before the Obergefell decision. And it was people bearing the moniker Christian who were circulating this story as if it was true. We can't afford to do that. The credibility of the message is always, always judged by the integrity of the messenger. We have to do better. Now, isn't this the church? There was a study that was shown in this kind of context. I think it's particularly poignant. There was a study that was published by Smithsonian Magazine. It was an article by Smithsonian Magazine about scientific findings. Where they wanted to do a study about whether or not you could reproduce the findings of studies that were published in like Science and in Nature, these highly prestigious academic peer-reviewed journals. And in certain fields, they found out that only 40% of the findings or the conclusions that were reached by these studies could be reproduced. Only 40%, less than half. And there's a number of reasons for that, but it goes to show you that you are not immune from post-truth influence just because you wear a white lab coat. Everyone is susceptible to this until you lose a sense of integrity. We have to be careful with this. And the third thing we lose, and this is probably one of the most dire, is we lose a sense of accountability and human value. All accountability. Protagoras said centuries ago, man is a measure of all things. Man is a measure of all things. There are no gods above us to tell us what's right and what's wrong. We are the determiner of all that's right and what's wrong. Centuries later, Tom Flynn, a very thoughtful secular humanist writer, says, secular humanism maintains that through a process of value inquiry informed by scientific and reflective thought, men and women can reach rough agreement concerning values, crafting ethical systems across a broad spectrum of circumstances. That's a mouthful of a way to say man is a measure of all things. But did you hear what he said? Through a process of value inquiry and scientific and reflective thought, men and women can reach rough agreement concerning values. So my question becomes this: have you seen this mythical rough agreement concerning values? With all of our genius, and we're quite bright as a species, a lot of ingenuity, we make these little machines we laughingly call phones have more computing power in one little pocket machine than the rockets that went to the moon. Have we reached this rough agreement concerning values? Have these little things given you the autonomy you've been seeking? Or are they little rectangular balls and chains that keep us addicted? I mean, you've had that experience, right, where your phone is on the table, and you're over here, and it vibrates in your pocket. Sort of almost like a referred pain, like an amputee sometimes experiences. That's how attached we are to these little machines. Rough agreement concerning values, and then you see what happens on the university campuses where certain professors can't even go and speak for fear of violence happening, or even the liberal professors who happen to be next to those conservative professors get attacked by proximity. Ask anybody, any Christian in the East or Middle East, ask any convert from a different religion to Christianity, just how rough that agreement actually is. I would tell you this: we are not reaching this rough agreement concerning values. We've simply agreed on the value of being rough. And I think that's where we're going, because we don't value each other anymore. We no longer see the good in another person. We no longer see the imago Dei. We are autonomy machines. Reminds me of Alexander Pope's poem in his Essays on Man. Go wiser thou, and in thy scale of sense, weigh thy opinion against providence. Call imperfection what thou fancy as such. Say, here he gives too little, and there too much. Destroy all creatures for thy sport or gust, yet cry, if man's unhappy, then God's unjust. If man alone engross not heaven's highest care, alone made perfect here, immortal there, snatch from his hand the balance and the rod, rejudge his justice, and be the God of God. What he's saying is that in our quest for autonomy, we are uprooting everything, completely uprooting and inverting the laws of nature. And we're suddenly seeing people as not valuable anymore. Yuval Harari, a secular atheist Jew, in his book *Sapiens*, makes the comment that we are verging on godhood now with all of our ingenuities, but we don't know what to do with the power we have. He says we have all these things where we can do wonderful things, but also pillage the natural world and pillage each other. He says we are gods now in our own minds. And he says this is an interesting quote. He says, is there anything more dangerous than irresponsible gods who don't know what they want? He's right. He's right. First, lack of wisdom. Second, we lose integrity. And third, we lose accountability and human value. What is the antidote to all this? What is the antidote? You know, the culture rejects the Bible as this freedom-restricting document written by dusty old people who had bigotry back then that no longer applies today. It's a freedom-restricting document according to the culture. I find this fascinating because the more I read the Bible, the more freedom-affirming it is over and over and over again. But the reason why we think it's freedom restricting is because we don't know what freedom actually is. We think freedom and autonomy are synonymous, but they're not. Autonomy is the ability to do what you want, when you want, how you want, no matter what the circumstances. And that's bedlam. That leads to the chaos I talked about before. Freedom is different. Freedom naturally has limitations. It naturally has limitations. It was Chesterton who pointed out that even art has limitations. The essence of every picture, he says, is the frame, after all. You may think that you are free to draw a giraffe with a short neck, only to find yourself unable to draw a giraffe at all. Facts always limit what you do. Facts are limitations, but it doesn't mean that you don't have freedom. He says you may free things from incidental characteristics, like you may free a tiger from his bars, but you dare not free a tiger from his stripes. It's important we understand that freedom has boundaries. When my wife and I were moving into our current house, back then we only had one child. My oldest, my son Yusuf, was barely even a year old. And we were looking at this beautiful house with a nice big backyard. But the problem was it backed up to a main road where cars and trucks were whizzing by very fast, very fast. We thought, the kids won't be able to play in this backyard because kids being kids, the ball will bounce into the road and the kids won't be able to look both ways because they're kids and they'll get pulverized. They can't enjoy the purpose of the backyard. What we had to do in order to give them that purpose was set up a boundary. Beyond this, you cannot play. When the boundary was set up, just enough of boundary, not too much, that's when they had the freedom to enjoy the purpose of the backyard. Freedom is necessarily bounded by two things, truth and human self-restraint. Os Guinness once again says the only restraint that does not limit freedom is self-restraint. And that self-restraint is based on a recognition of the objective moral law, that there is something above you and above me that tells us what we should and should not do. So it needs these boundaries. The Bible speaks of this specifically. A familiar passage, John chapter 8, verses 31 to 36. You've all heard this before, but I think it bears repeating because I want you to see a coupling here. That's very, very important. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Knowledge and truth go hand in hand, not feelings and truth. Knowledge and truth go hand in hand, but then the coupling he really makes is, if you know the truth will set you free. So truth and freedom are inextricably linked. That's the first thing. They answer him, by the way, in a hysterical way. It's nothing short of hilarious. We are children of Abraham and have never been enslaved by anyone. How is it you say you will become free? Never enslaved by anyone? Did you forget the whole 400 years in Egypt thing? You celebrate Passover every year, which is your liberation from that bondage. And by the way, you know when they're saying this? They're saying this while under Roman occupation. When preferences matter more to you, facts just completely get blurred in your mind. And Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." Did you catch the other coupling? The Son sets you free as well. He says the truth sets you free, the Son sets you free, the Son is the truth. The truth is not found in a way, in an idea, or in a preference. It's found in a person. Now, you can't just say that kind of a thing. You got to back that kind of a claim up. And they asked him to, and he did. He backed it up through his resurrection. And I've debated plenty of people before on this. You can find them on YouTube, and Sean's done the same thing, and others on the speaking panels have debated atheists before, and you can see the remarkable evidence for the resurrection. A young man walked up to a microphone at Yale University. Ravi and I were at Yale, and a young man walked up to the microphone. He says, "I see how truth leads to freedom, but this whole Jesus leads to freedom thing, I'm still having a hard time with that. And you mentioned the resurrection. How does that all fit into this? How does that all fit in?" I said, "I'm so glad you asked. So glad you asked, because it gives me the chance to show you the fully orbed picture of what Christianity offers you and me. Freedom is not the ability to do what you want. That's just one side. It's very shallow. Freedom is the ability to do what you want in accordance with what you should, based on what you are. That's fully orbed freedom. To do what you want based on what you should, according to what you are. Now the question is, what are you? Are you the flotsam and jetsam of the universe? Are you, as Lawrence Krauss described you, you are a cosmic pollution, you are a bit of cosmic pollution, or are you made in God's image? I say you're made in God's image because Jesus said so, and then he died and rose again from the dead. And guys who rise from the dead tend to have credibility. And he tells me who you are. And that's where your freedom really comes. Let me close with this. Very important. The secular world understands this. They really do. If the thousands who come to the open forums we hold, and we're having, by the way, a skeptics night tomorrow at Christ Church of the Valley, tomorrow night from 5 to 7. Skeptics are welcome. Any question they want to ask, I'll be there to answer questions for them tomorrow night. They come and they ask their questions not for the zinger, but they come to actually get answers because they're now in the grisly aftermath, the grisly hangover of a post-truth imbibing of preferences, and they want real answers. They want the antidote for this now, and they really want, I have tons of hope for our youth. I really do. The secular band Crash Parallel has a song called Rain Delays, where they point out that this culture wants to see fulfillment in things that are personally true, not objectively true, but they put their faith in things that are neither personal nor true. Think about the words of the song. Sleepless nights and endless days, in mini skirts and serving trays, selling sex for pocket change, waking up from rain delays, and living off the alcohol with no one but a cab to call, lost inside a bathroom stall. This carbon copy life withdrawal, and driving cars we can't afford, making sure we're never bored between coffee grinds and corner stores, and chasing dreams with fishing nets and limousines and cigarettes and long weekends without regrets. Well, no one here is taking bets. I need someone to believe in, someone to fill this space with grace, to look into my eyes and touch my face, someone to make me strong, someone to make me belong, someone to make me alive. Alive. Not better, alive. That's what the resurrection offers to you and to me and to that young man who asked that question. The culture has been looking for things that are neither personal nor true to find fulfillment, and they can find their fulfillment in Christ because in Christ, the truth is a person. God bless you guys.